Okay, no problem. Good afternoon. As Alice said, I'm Nigel Beresford. I run an operation called the Knowledge Group. We've had a long history with academia. Knowledge Technology had the original chess deal to provide Ethernet cards. Landcare networked a number of universities. We own the Athens product, which we sold back to the JISC in 2002. And RMS has provided service management solutions to a number of universities. The theme or thrust of the talk today is partnering with Amazon Web Services to deliver self-service password reset. And I've put together a short agenda which really takes us through why we decided to deploy the solution over the cloud, the decision-making processes as to whether to do it ourselves with another vendor, and why we chose Amazon Web Services, and the experience to date. I think access to almost every application today is controlled by passwords, and securities mandates that those passwords are becoming increasingly complex, and users, especially in the corporate world, are being mandated to change them, usually on a quarterly basis. And users being human beings with all the rest of the clutter in our lives, and the passwords becoming more complex, invariably we forget them. And the port of call to fix that is the IT help desk. So from a user perspective, also from an IT perspective, there are some market drivers towards providing a self-service password solution. If you can remove that load from the service desk, those service desk agents can be deployed on more meaningful activities. It's difficult to quantify what percentage of calls are password reset. Gartner says up to 30%, and that the average user forgets its password 1.5 times a year. I don't know where the figures come from, but from our experience, it varies widely according to organization and market segment. I was in Las Vegas at the HP show last year, and Las Vegas police get up to 70% of the calls password reset. Other organizations can be as low as 10%. I think there's also a major business driver from IT organizations that in deploying a self-service password solution, they can significantly improve the security of the solution through authentication. From the user perspective, there are benefits that are perhaps less quantifiable, but perhaps equally important. I mean, one of the challenges of IT today is dealing with far more literate users that have very high expectations, having dealt with Apple, of the service they can expect, and they want a 24/7 service that they can dial into. And for those corporate users whose PCs are locked down, if they come home on a Sunday from holiday and they want to prep for the Monday morning and they've forgotten their password, if they've got a 24/7 service desk, they can phone it and they can reset the password, but the old password's still cached in the laptop and they can't use it until they come back on the corporate LAN. So there are some key market drivers in terms of why to do it. The password reset market's a very broad church, and it varies from a simple portal solution that can be knocked up by an 18-year-old right the way through to some fairly significant IDM solutions. FastPass is the product that we market in the UK, and it's a standalone password reset solution. They're a Scandinavian company that's been around for about 20 years now, and they came out of the IDM space, and essentially I think they recognise that most of the commercial drivers before IDM were predicated on password resets, but most organisations ran out of resource before they actually got to implement it. And then Nasdaq and quoted on the Copenhagen Stock Exchange. But in the UK, they're probably the product of choice in the marketplace. We support about 150 organisations in the UK, ranging from large organisations like the BBC globally, the Department of Health, British Nuclear, down to smaller operations like the Fraud Squad and the Football Association. The product has, just to give you a bit of background, it's an enterprise level solution, and it has a number of key benefits. It's got a PC client that if you are locked out of your laptop opens up a VPN connection, allows you to reset it, shuts down, and you can carry on as normal remotely. It's got connectors for 95% of the environments that you're going to run into, and they're quite sort of open to developing more connectors. You can synchronize or selectively synchronize your passwords. It has a help desk module that allows the help desk to reset in a fraction of a time and logs your tickets on the help desk. It's multilingual. We added Welsh to it 2 years ago. It's AT compliant, so if you need interfaces to JAWS, Dragon on Zoom text for the visually impaired, it copes with that. It's got a significant enrolment module to complement their business practices, to drive up enrolment. And in fact, in the university variant, students don't even need to enroll. You can download straight from information that you've captured when they subscribe to the organisation. It offers multiple choice of authentication, and more importantly, it's very secure. But perhaps more importantly, up until 2014, the solution was delivered as an on-premise solution, and that was the only option available to us. So in 2014, we made a move towards putting FastPass on the cloud. And probably from the, cloud's also a broad church, so what we're really referring to is the Amazon definition of on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. And I guess the key to us was if we were going to put it on the cloud, would users adopt it? Were they ready to adopt it? And secondly, perhaps more importantly, which cloud provider were we going to use? Should we build our own data center, which we have the technical capability and the resources to do it? Do we put it in a cage, or do we partner with one of the many cloud providers out there on the marketplace? And perhaps if I take you a little bit behind the drivers that lay behind our decision, it makes the decision a little bit more clearer. Our first driver was driving down total cost of ownership, and we had three key criteria there. One was to lower the limit, or lower the threshold by which it became possible for a customer to buy into the solution. The sheer mathematics of it on an on-premise solution meant by the time you've purchased and deployed and maintained the infrastructure, then any customer who had less than 2,000 users, in all probability, it wasn't cost effective for him to use FastPass. The second one was no matter what value organizations are adding to their end users, underlying the decision there's always a return on investment calculation that's been made. And we needed to address that, and I'll address that in a moment. And thirdly, we wanted to drive down our internal costs of support. And the decision there was, yes, do we do with the cloud, and if so, which cloud operator is going to give us the lower cost of internal support. I think there's a golden rule with any self-service solution that if users don't adopt and utilize it, you don't realize the benefits. And FastPass is no different from that. And traditionally, FastPass was sold on a per-user basis, but the reality is that the cost per password reset, if you know what your internal cost is, the cost of utilizing that in a self-service environment is your total cost of ownership divided by the number of users utilizing it. So if an operation had 30,000 users hypothetically and you priced it at £1 a user per year, they got a 30k spend. If they're adding on 10k's worth of infrastructure, maintenance, license costs, etc., it's a 40k spend. If only 2,000 users utilize the situation, the cost is not £1 per user, it's £20 per password reset. And we need to drive that cost equation down. And what we wanted to try and achieve was to deliver FastPass from day one to a user below their internal cost. So it removed the risk equation of I'm going to invest in this solution, and if I get that kind of utilization, I will benefit from it, etc. So the first port of call on that really was to remove the upfront costs in terms of the infrastructure and strip it out completely. So in that hypothetical case, instead of spending 40k, you were down to 30k, and you were looking at the license costs. The second area we were looking at was to try and correlate cost to value. So instead of pricing the product on the basis of per user, price it on the cost of base per password reset. And one of the biggest issues of doing that on premise is that on paper you're sharing the risk with the user, but the reality is the risk is all with the supplier, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to justify to FastPass that it was a good way to go because their expectations weren't being met. Part of that reason, I think, was that there were different users will quote a very high level of password resets up front in good faith, but the possibility is that they're deploying it for different reasons, maybe as a freebie to a customer, or that once they've got past the operational issues of actually deploying it, they're more focused, and they don't focus on the delivery of the application and the rollout of the application. So that was our end goal. The second one, particularly with managed service providers, was speed and ease of deployment. There are major business drivers for implementing a self-service password solution, but the reality is it's not the only way you can achieve it. The service desk can achieve it. It might not be the most efficient way of doing it, but the service desk is capable of actually rolling it out. And in a world where cash is tight, budgets are constrained, and the organization is dealing with multiple priorities, invariably other priorities would get in the way. And the FastPass side, because it wasn't unique and the only way of solving the solution, would get rolled back. And we wanted to make it easier to get it in quickly and cleanly. The third main priority that we had was adoption. Now, we talked about the fact that if people don't adopt and utilize a self-service solution, they're just not going to get any benefits back from it. To complement the best practice guides that FastPass had in the enrollment module, we jointly launched a two-tier model. One was to get utilization and enrollment up to 80%, and the second one was to drive that up to 100%. And we built that around a number of best practice modules targeting user acceptance, service desk, security and management. But it was proving very, very difficult to deploy that kind of model on an on-premise situation, partly because of the distances, the costs of traveling, getting resources together. We felt that if we could bring it all back and control the platform, then we could actually achieve what we wanted to do. The fourth major region was geographical reach. We represent FastPass in the UK, but also their exclusive distributors in Australia and New Zealand, and represent them in the USA. And it's not cost effective to send consultants to those areas to install a solution. And there was a fifth major element, which was the market shift towards the cloud. Now, this industry moves in waves, and whether it's sort of mainframe, mini, networking, the waves come through, and each sort of wave there's a paradigm shift, and the customers adopt the technology either to get a competitive advantage or to cut costs. And as a supplier, you've got to be in a position to resolve that. We looked at the IDC reports, and everyone was talking about the cloud, but no one could define what the cloud was, and there was a huge amount of confusion around whether your information was going to be held in Vietnam or processed in Alaska or whatever. But the IDC report in 2015 said that there were 37 million business servers in the cloud, or available in the world, being utilized in the world. 15% were in the cloud, and that would move to, I think it was 50% by 2018. I don't know where they got the figures from, and the accuracy of it to a certain extent is irrelevant, because even if they're 20% out, it's not a wave, it's a tsunami with a very, very steep face. So we felt that we ought to be there, and the question was, actually, how do we get there? We had three criteria on the table. We went to our technical guys, and if I'm very honest about it, they wanted to build it in-house, and they were quite convinced they could do it cheaper and all the other good things in-house. And we went out and talked to the major consultancy companies. Gartner, who I don't actually have a lot of time for because they're a very political organization, they produced a magic quadrant in 2015. And at the top right-hand corner was Amazon. And their view was that Amazon had 10 times the capacity to execute, or 10 times the capability to execute, and the capacity of the other 14 vendors put together. And that shocked us to the core, because we'd heard of Amazon, and considering a number of the other vendors were Google and Microsoft, you couldn't ignore that kind of projection. We bumped into an ex-colleague of ours who was a senior manager at Amazon and got more information and started delving down into who the organisation was and the size and the capability. I think we knew at that stage that it was spawned out of the retail service side of the business, but I had no idea how big and how fast moving it was. And I think last year they turned over 8 billion, with something like 1 million customers. And when you think Amazon Retail's not even in their top 10 customers, it gives some indication of their scale. And they claim they're adding more servers on and disks on a daily basis than it takes to support Amazon Retail, as it is at the moment. At that stage, I think they had 11 regional centres. By last year, it had risen to 17, and I think with a number of others going live this year, it'll have 19, each with multiple areas with multi-second latency between them. What surprised us, I think, most of all, is we thought about Amazon as being a computing environment where you could rent computing resources from them. What we didn't realise at that stage was they had something like 64 other services, of which compute, or EC2, was only one of them, and they're adding them almost on a daily basis. And they've launched, last year they launched a database service, a sort of low-cost database service at the beginning of last year in competition with Amazon. It might have been the previous year. And last year it was already up to $1 billion turnover, so they're a very, very fast-moving organisation. For me, one of the key kind of determinants in selecting Amazon was the Chasm Corporation in the States. I'm sure most of you know about Geoffrey Moore, and he's sort of a marketing guru in the States. But for those that you don't, he came up with a theory that was conceived to be behind Sun and a number of the other vendors in the 90s. 80s and 90s, that said if you're looking at a very fast-moving market, you've got to psychometrically profile that bell-shaped curve. And at the beginning of that curve, there'll be the early adopters and the innovators who use the technology because they get a commercial advantage. And they're quite forgiving, they're quite prepared to live with a service that's not complete and a product that's not complete because of the advantage it gives them. But to actually address the mainstream marketplace, you've got to almost reinvent the company. And it's got to be one size fits all. It's got to be totally productized. Well, Geoffrey Moore has said that Amazon's crossed the chasm and the rest of the guys are still lagging behind. Now, if you think about the networking environment that we were involved with, we were a Cisco Gold partner, and I think we moved about £80 million worth of hardware into the academic environment alone. When we were trading in the networking wave coming through, there were 4 vendors. There was Cisco, 3Com, Bay, and Cabletron. And in every market, you get chimps and then a few monkeys shape out, and then eventually a gorilla arrives. Well, that wave, we were halfway through, or we were well into that wave, years into that wave before a gorilla emerged. The gorilla seems to have emerged in this marketplace before we were even aware of it, of the marketplace in a way. The Amazon sold to us 6 key benefits that were out there. One, there'd be no upfront investment. It was an OPEX model, not a CAPEX model, which when, cash is always an issue in terms of getting out of your FD, was quite attractive. The second thing was that they guaranteed the lowest ongoing total cost of ownership as a combination between the volumes of scale of implementing the thousands of servers and licenses and passing it back to the user, and the flexible pricing structures that they put in place. Pricing, if you deal with Amazon, is something you've really got to research with them. We built all our business models on a sort of pay-as-you-go basis, only to discover that actually you'd get a 70% discount on that if you're prepared to commit for 3 years, and you see some through their reserved instant pricing, and you see some staggering business models that they actually quote out there in case studies. I looked at one in a drug company in the States where they had to do a huge exercise to run through all their results, and I think they were looking at 50 or 40,000 server cores and a multi-million-pound budget, and they did it with Amazon for $4,000 by utilising unused computer capacity that was available over 4 days. So there are some incredible pricing deals, but you've got to dig beneath the surface. They also offered flexible capacity. When we looked at setting it up in-house, The question that came back from the technical guys was how many users are you going to have in each pod? What's the throughput going to be? And then the argument was, well, we don't really know, and how often are they going to use the situation? We don't really know. In that case, we better spec the largest servers necessary to cope over that period of time. With Amazon, once you understand the design, you can flex the capacity and build, and it will grow with you, and you can flex up and down and build certain rules. So those first three key benefits really hit us, but the reality is that Amazon sell on the next two, which is speed and agility, and apps, not ops. It's the fact that large corporations that we deal with, they can have a 9-week change cycle, and if you get anything wrong, it moves into the next 9-week change cycle. And it's not uncommon to have an installation of FastPass that you can do in 3 or 4 days that takes 6-7 months to grind out, not because it takes us six or 7 months or whatever. It's just because by the time they've got their change, their procurement, their networking and resources and move backwards and forwards, it can really slow things down. And the apps, not ops, you can focus really on, become a very disruptive technology vendor in that marketplace that then go to a business division who has the budget. They don't have to go through IT anymore. They can deliver the application, focus on it, and Bob's your uncle, it's up and running. And the last point, obviously, we were trying to deploy into Australasia and the States, and they had global reach, so you could build an AMI image of the solution, and whilst it wasn't just as simple as cutting and pasting, you could have a pod up and running within a matter of hours without actually leaving your desk. Amazon sold to us very heavily. They spin the sort of NASA's moved lock, stock and barrel to Amazon or News Corp, and they've saved 100 million. But the reality is that most organizations do it on a kind of viral basis, and they're augmenting their on-premise resources with a kind of hybrid solution, or they're migrating existing apps and data to the cloud, or they're targeting department by department and building new initiatives on the cloud rather than going the old way. And their route to market appealed to us a lot. They're targeting people where infrastructure and software was reaching end of life. A choice had to be made as to whether you upgraded it using OPEX, or whether you committed CAPEX to it, and it crystallized the decision of whether to do it in-house or whether to do it on the cloud, and targeting new projects that can't wait for 6 months. And within the RMS application environment, we were at that time trying to roll out the Vendia product suite, traditional service management suites, a client server. They fell perfectly into that first sort of bullet point, and that rationale appealed to us a lot. So we built a 10 server pod with complete failover and resilience, and it was based in Dublin at that stage. Dublin was the only European region that Amazon had. And we launched it to FastPass and a number of customers. I think it's fair to say initially FastPass were fairly cynical. They said, yeah, we think it's a great idea, and if we get any customers that want it, we'll come to you. And we said, fine, okay. I think our sales guys were very cynical. They all thought it was a fantastic idea, but our customers weren't ready for it. And to be honest, the customers we presented it to, particularly the MSPs, were fairly cynical as well. They all felt it was a great idea, but their customers weren't ready for the cloud, and they wouldn't entertain it. And the biggest hurdle, both in presenting it in new business and to the customers, was security. No one was interested in putting and utilising the cloud. Over the last 2-3 years, that's completely gone away, and I think when Amazon launched, or when the UK region goes live at the end of this year, as I believe it is, that will be finally put to bed. And I think the technical director of NASA has said you're safer on Amazon than you are in-house. Yeah. It's difficult to know from our perspective what was behind things changing, whether it was a natural sort of evolution of that wave gathering momentum and people becoming more comfortable with the cloud, or whether the catalyst was the fact that we changed the commercial terms and were able to match pricing to password resets and drop the price quite considerably. But it changed probably over a matter of 12 months. And in fact, our largest MSP, who spends about $250,000 with us on on FastPass, who said that categorically they wouldn't adopt us, now has 50% of their accounts off their secure cloud container and on the FastPass cloud. And the driver behind that was their own internal cost of ownership and the time it takes to do everything in-house. I think an element of that is they're probably not a fair representation, because I think an element of that is they tend to have a very high degree of cross-charging, but it still manifested itself in a movement to the cloud. It then moved forward, and we partnered. FastPass approached us and said, could we partner officially and globally with them and get into a much tighter commercial relationship where we would deliver the cloud for them globally, which we do, and they deliver accounts on a sort of monthly basis to it. And the whole commercial environment has changed, whereby we're even offering free services for the portal, etc. on the cloud. If I look back on the exercise at what were our drivers and did we achieve what we wanted to do with Amazon, I would say yes, on total cost of ownership, absolutely. We've driven that cost internally way down. Yeah, there's no question about that. It's proved the right way to go. In terms of speed and ease of deployment, yes, absolutely. We can, rather than have a 6 to 9 months sometimes lead cycle, if somebody signs on the dotted line for it now, we ship them electronically a free software gateway. It takes 2 hours, maybe 3 hours for us to either install it or talk them through it. And operationally they're up and running, and the focus then goes on rolling the application out. Has it worked in terms of adoption? It's difficult to get an accurate metrics, but for the MSP that's moved its customers to the cloud, the lowest level of enrollment or adoption, we've got 71%, and one of them's at 95%. If I look at their on-premise, they're down around the 40-50. And I think talking to Finn Jensen, the CEO of FastPass, he's seeing the same trend throughout Europe. For geographical reach, yeah, it's great. We've got Australia and New Zealand distributors, and we can just boot up, and it's moved. The most significant movement, though, has been in market shift, and I don't really know where it's going, because it's moving quite fast, and it's difficult to actually quantify where this market's going. I mean, one good example is Hewlett-Packard. I mean, they're the world's largest computer company. We've been talking to them for 5 years about trying to get them to adopt FastPass, and made absolutely no progress at all. Last year it was suggested to them that they could contract with us to embed the portal in the Service Anywhere, and then it'd be available over the cloud. They've done that. They launched it in Vegas. It's turned the whole thing around, yeah. So that there very clearly has been a benefit in terms of partnering with Amazon and driving down the costs, yeah. From our own perspective, we're, I suppose, putting our money where our mouth is at the moment. We'd virtualized a lot of our infrastructure 4 or 5 years ago, and gone from I don't know how many servers down to a number of big servers in a cage. We're now going through the process of removing, as those servers come to the end of life. We're putting all our own internal infrastructure on Amazon, because I'm convinced the total cost of ownership is a lot lower. And you can actually remove all the focus of you guys managing and feeding and watering these things and concentrating on where the industry or the business is supposed to be going. Now, inevitably, that's a bit painful, because Amazon have virtually taken a chunk out of the industry and rendered null and void a lot of the roles that previously existed. So from our perspective, yeah, you can drive the total cost of ownership down substantially. I would caveat it with two points in sort of conclusion. One is that Amazon is a self-service organization. They're incredibly difficult to deal with, not because they put up any barriers to deal with them. They're very, very responsive and keen to deal with you, but it is self-service, and that business is moving so quickly that unless you invest really heavily and you really understand what you're doing, you're not going to reap the best commercial benefits out of it. And the second one is a must from my perspective, yeah, and that's that you need to have change control processes in place. It does exactly what it said on the tin, and it's very, very easy to spin up new resources. what we found in the early days is that, the finance guy would come through foaming at the mouth and with a bill from Amazon in US dollars that he couldn't equate to the budget. And we thought we had 40 servers up and running, and we had 66. And it wasn't the inability to control the servers going up, it was the ability to make sure that when someone had requested that they wanted a proof of concept, or they wanted a server out to do a bug fix, or they wanted a demonstration server with someone's particular database on, that they shut the whole thing down afterwards. Because if you don't do that, Amazon will continue to bill you, and you'll run into huge costs at the end of the day. That really concludes the 30 minutes that I've got, Alistair, so unless there are any questions, I'll hand over.
Thanks, Nigel. Thanks, everyone. We're running over a little bit, so what I'm going to do is hold off questions